Welcome to the Sound and the Healing podcast. We're your hosts, Claire Bigley and Rohini Kaniganti. Maybe we're all searching among the branches for what only appears in the roots. This is what we'll be exploring. Please join us. Well, hello, everybody. This is our first episode. We're so glad you joined us. In this episode, Claire and I want to introduce ourselves to you, and we'd love to talk some and reflect with each other and discover with each other the meaning of the title of this podcast, The Sound and the Healing, and perhaps then explore what it means to each of us, this Rumi quote that we used about the branches and the roots. We're hoping that you will discover alongside with us. Claire, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Rohini. I would love to. Yes. Welcome. We're so excited to be embarking on this new exploratory, playful, joyful project and creative musings with you all. Let me take a few minutes and kind of introduce myself and share with you what brings me to the table. So I started playing the piano at a young age, always been drawn to music, to sound. I took a very classical route in getting started and went to university and played a lot, got my piano performance degree. And for many years, I was an accompanist. I was a teacher. I worked as a pianist with a voice teacher as well. So I was immersed in music. I've been immersed in music my whole life. It served as a guardian and a healer without me even being aware of what it was doing. From an early age, I knew that no matter what was going on in my life, that if I sat down at the piano, if I walked into band class, if I walked into chorus, everything would melt away.
Mm-hmm.
I became harmonious. I became grounded in a way, and I was able to forget all the annoyances, anything that was clouding my vision. So this was a lifeline for me just from the get-go. And so I worked mainly as a musician for many years. And then probably as I entered into my 40s, I had my life kind of dropped out from under me, which I think happens to many of us on a certain path in our midlife. And life says, let's shake things up a little bit. And I started to find myself drawn to energy work, energy through the body, meditation, kind of metaphysical or spiritual or whatever you want to call it, direction. I was really curious and interested.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself working with a man who ended up teaching a course that I took for a while. And it entailed an energy work, tapping, many different modalities of healing. And sound happened to be one of them. And I remember him saying, you think you're behind in this particular journey. And he said, you're really very much ahead of the game. Because he said sound is such an important, viable way of healing and energy shifting, frequency shifting. And he said, you don't have any idea of how into the game you are already. And so in taking this class, I started to realize what he was talking about. I had been training for this my whole life without being conscious of it. So now I am utilizing my piano, my music, my way of harmonizing within in a very different way, working with clients, working with tuning forks, just so it's kind of taken its own different path. So that's kind of where I am now. I also record my music. I got into working with different states that I would feel I was in an emotional state. And I would sit down at the piano and record what would come through my fingers. And so I started recording. And I'm always fascinated by what shows up on the other end, because I'll start at a certain state. And as the piece continues, with music, you can go through many facets, and it will transform itself in a note to a different state. So you end up on the other side of the piece in a completely different place than where you started. So it's just a fascinating journey for me. And when Rohini suggested that the two of us do a podcast, that little girl inside of me went, yes, yes, yes. So here we are, and I'm so glad to have you listening. So thank you for joining us. And Ro, let's hear about your journey a little bit and what you bring to this podcast.
Thank you, love. It was just joyful to receive your story. I've heard it before, and yet it's not the words. It's not the story. This resonance comes through, which is so powerful. I could feel the opening every time you sat down to play, going deep into your roots, and the access you had to everything. Doors upon doors opening. And so much comes through your voice, Claire. The sound from your voice is healing music.
Well, and that's so true of all of us, isn't it? There's something about the body that so responds to our own voice.
Mm-hmm. And I hope we'll get into that in the following sessions, where we get to really play with our voices and the resonance of our voice. So you asked, where did I come from? I grew up in a culture really marinating in poetry and in sound. Sanskrit, which is the language that my mother tongue, Telugu, is derived from, or one of the languages from which it's derived, gives tremendous importance to not just the word or the syllable, but the sound itself and the vibration of that sound. And that these vibrations are deeply healing at profound levels that are unseen. And so in that Rumi quote, when we talk about, we live in the branches, right? Our senses can see and feel, hear, have a very direct experience with the outer world. And so we tend to focus our attention there. But what is unseen and deep and intertwined and mysterious and beautiful and resilient and resourced, so many ands here, are the roots of our system. And that so much can be learned and derived when we connect to the source of who we truly are. And I am hoping, Claire, that we get to be in this beautiful process of discovery together with our listeners. I went from this childhood that was immersed and permeated with the sacredness of sound of various forms. I also heard sound that was really painful in various forms, whether it was screaming or shouting. And I understood, I was observing how it affected my nervous system. And this was one of the first ways in which I sensed the response of a nervous system to its environment. And I became so deeply interested in understanding the roots of who we are and why we are, what is trauma, and what is pain, what is joy. And I ended up at first studying chemistry in college, which was incredibly holy and sacred, and we can talk about that a different time. And from there, developed this love of providing counseling and healing to people from a more psychotherapeutic perspective. How does that connect with chemistry? You'll have to pay for that ticket. Hear that story. And then I went to medical school. There was grad school in there, working with EPA projects in the environment, but I ended up in medical school, which was a really extraordinary and sacred journey. It was painful. It was hard. And my teacher, Sally Erickson, at that time, coached me every time, and she kept saying, "This is a labor of love, Rohini." And these were words, but there's a way in which these words landed very deeply into layers and layers of my heart, because she connected laboring with heart. And it created a different container with which I approached studying and learning, and then offering the gifts of this learning. Over the years and decades, I've gone into family medicine, into geriatric medicine, into hospice and palliative care, and most recently integrating that into integrative psychiatry, utilizing modalities such as psychedelics for healing. That's a whole other discussion again. And my work puts together all of these fields, really. But what's incredibly important for me to feel into with you, listener, and with you, Claire, is that when we are deeply present with who we truly are, the veils become very thin. What does that mean? That's a whole other exploration. And ironically, in suffering and in illness, the veils become thin as they do in sleep, in dreaming, in experiences of our own dying or being around other people's dying. This is what makes these experiences so sacred and so powerful as teachers. And the way that we heal in life and in all of these experiences is nonlinear. It's unpredictable. But when we are deeply rooted into who we truly are, our branches can engage beautifully with life without fear. So I'll say this much, there's just so many more layers and layers and layers. And perhaps this is enough for now. I can't wait to keep exploring these elements of healing through sound, through vibration, and really the intention here is to have you experience who you truly are listening to this podcast and everything that might blossom within you.
Well, and it's fascinating for me as I hear you, Rohini, speaking of everything you touched on and dove into. I'm struck by, you take sound, the very enveloping of sound. There don't have to be any words, so it can hold everything without any separation. And I feel like there's a similarity between that and healing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, both states are situations where you're not necessarily having to explain or rationalize or speak. It is in being with both of these two things. You know, you're sort of catapulted into that liminal space, into that all. So yes, very, very sacred.
Very sacred. Mm-hmm. Sound has the capacity to be felt at the physical level, at a very gross body level. When I say gross, I don't mean something bad or pejorative. I just mean at a very dense body level, at a subtle level within feelings and sensations, emotions, thoughts, and then within this very open spiritual level of that liminal space that you just described. And we get to explore this together.
I'm
How
feeling
exciting.
Yes, I was just going to say I'm feeling pretty darn lucky at the moment.
We get to play with each other,
Yes.
right?
Yes, yes, yes.
What a metaphor that is in music. And maybe we end there for today. We're so glad that you joined us.
Welcome. And we hope you'll join us for more. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so very much for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed yourself and will share the sound and the healing with your friends. Please go to our website with any questions or comments you may have, as we plan on using your questions in upcoming episodes. Our website and socials are included at the bottom of our episode descriptions, so please join us to continue the discussion. Until next time, keep on sounding and healing.